There's a building on Chalmers Street with a door that opens onto a room where human beings were sold. The walls are still standing. The city around this door is one of the most beautiful in America, and almost everything you can see from its threshold was built by people who walked through it in chains. This is Charleston, South Carolina. In the 1800s, it was the capital of American slavery. In this video, I've used modern AI tools to bring historical photographs and illustrations to life, allowing us to walk through the streets as they appeared over a century ago. Take my hand, we're going in. In 1800, Charleston was a city of roughly 18,800 souls, more than half of them enslaved. The wealthiest port south of Philadelphia. The only major American city where black people outnumbered white. By the time the century ended, war, fire, a bombardment, and emancipation would reduce it to a beautiful ruin. Step off the dock onto East Bay Street. The year is 1820. The air hits you first, thick, almost liquid, carrying salt, jasmine, and the rotting tang of pluff mud exposed by low tide. The houses lining this street are turned sideways, long piazzas running down the side to catch the breeze. These are Charleston's famous single houses. In a city without air conditioning, that cross-ventilation is the difference between sleeping and suffocating. But the real story isn't the houses, it's what paid for them. Rice made Charleston rich. From the 1720s through the 1860s, nothing else came close. Low-country rice plantations generated profit margins as high as 26%. Some planters called their estates gold mines. Nathaniel Haywood, the state's largest rice planter, owned more than 1,800 enslaved people by 1850. When he died, his estate was worth over $2 million, roughly $63 million today. Then came cotton after 1793, and Charleston's harbor bristled with ships bound for Liverpool, their holds packed with bales harvested by people who would never see a penny of it. The wealth was staggering. The wealth was obscene, and every grain of rice was grown by stolen hands in flooded swamps where malaria killed by the hundreds. Take a boat out past the harbor mouth to Sullivan's Island. Remember this name. Between 1670 and the federal ban in 1808, approximately 40% of all enslaved Africans brought to North America passed through this island. Toni Morrison called it the Black Ellis Island, though the comparison is almost obscenely inadequate. Ellis Island was a gateway to hope, and Sullivan's Island was a gateway to bondage. Ships arrived from West Africa after voyages so brutal that at least 13% of their captives died in transit. Survivors were quarantined in pest houses here, not out of compassion, but to ensure they'd fetch a good price at auction. Between 1803 and 1807, as traders rushed to beat the federal ban, more than 40,000 enslaved Africans entered through Charleston. In 1807 alone, the port handled 95% of all Africans trafficked into the United States. Stand here for a moment. Let that settle. Would you have survived that crossing? Would you have survived what came after? Tell me in the comments. Back in Charleston, notice what visitors in the 1800s remarked on constantly. A Liverpool merchant visiting in 1834 noted that nearly every worker he saw, the servants, cart drivers, porters, market vendors, and most journeymen in the trades, were enslaved. By 1820, the city's 23,000 residents had a black majority. The Charleston market, founded in 1807, was staffed by enslaved people and free people of color. The musical street cries of women carrying baskets on their heads, their voices blending English with West African gula, were the soundtrack of this city. The enslaved didn't just labor here. They built the city, laid the bricks, forged the ironwork on those famous gates, plastered the walls, tended the gardens. The cobblestones beneath your feet were originally ship ballast, but they were laid by enslaved hands. Notice the man walking ahead of us. Tall, well-dressed for a working man, carrying carpenter's tools. His name is Denmark Vesey. Born around 1767 in St. Thomas, enslaved by a ship captain who brought him to Charleston. In 1799, Vesey won a lottery, $1,500, and bought his freedom. But he couldn't buy his wife or children. They belonged to someone else. For 20 years he worked as a carpenter and burned with quiet fury. He was literate, followed news from Haiti's slave revolution, and helped found an African Methodist Episcopal congregation with over 3,000 members. In 1821, he began organizing what would have been the largest slave revolt in American history, planning meetings at his home on Bull Street, opening each session with the Book of Exodus. Some accounts say he recruited 9,000 people. A domestic servant revealed the plot. By summer 1822, 130 black Charlestonians were arrested. 35 were hanged, including Vesey on July 2nd. He never confessed. The consequences? The African church demolished, a municipal guard of 150 men funded, and in 1842, an armory called the Citadel, built on Marion Square, so white men could train to suppress future uprisings. The Citadel exists because a carpenter won the lottery, bought his freedom, and refused to accept that his children could not have theirs. If that stopped you in your tracks, you're not alone. A tap on the like button tells us these stories deserve to be told. December 20th, 1860. Inside Institute Hall on Meeting Street, 169 delegates signed the Ordinance of Secession. South Carolina is the first state to leave the Union. Church bells ring, cannons fire. 4 months later, at 4:30 in the morning on April 12th, 1861, a mortar shell arcs across the dark harbor and bursts over Fort Sumter. Within half an hour, and 43 guns are firing on a federal garrison of 85 men. The bombardment lasts 34 hours. Citizens climb to their rooftops to watch. Nobody is killed, not a single person. It is a bloodless opening to a war that will kill more than 620,000 Americans and free 3.9 million enslaved people. The destruction comes fast. On December 11th, 1861, a fire breaks out near East Bay and Hazel Streets. A cold gale fans it across the peninsula. By morning, 540 acres have burned. Nearly 600 homes, 5 churches, hundreds of businesses. Institute Hall, where secession was signed 1 year earlier, is ashes. A journalist describes chunks of burning wood whirling through the air, giving the night the appearance of a fiery storm. Then comes the siege. Beginning July 1863, Union forces bombard Charleston for 587 days, one of the longest sieges in modern warfare. The steeple of St. Michael's Church is used as an aiming point. When Jefferson Davis visits, he declares it better to leave the city a heap of ruins than surrender. When Confederate forces finally evacuate on February 17, 1865, the city is unrecognizable. Sherman bypasses Charleston entirely on his march north. There is, he reasons, little left to burn. And then, in the ruins, a moment. On April 14, 1865, exactly 4 years after he lowered the American flag over Fort Sumter, General Robert Anderson raises it again. The crowd includes abolitionists, formerly enslaved people, and Robert Smalls, who had stolen a Confederate gunboat and sailed it to freedom. That same night, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. The joy and the horror land on the same day. That is Charleston in the 1800s in a single sentence. Stand with me at the Battery as the century ends. The great plantations are ruined. The wealth is gone. The enslaved are free. The richest city in the South is now among its poorest. But it's still here. The single houses still catch the breeze. The iron gates forged by enslaved craftsmen still swing. St. Michael's, once used as a target, still rises above Broad Street. The door on Chalmers Street is still there. The old slave mart is now a museum. Sullivan's Island finally got its memorial in 2008, a small black steel bench. Not a 300-foot tower, a bench, a place to sit and remember. These stories survive because people pass them on. If someone you know would want to walk these streets with us, send this their way. Charleston doesn't just preserve its history, it lives inside it, still arguing with it, still reckoning with what it means to be beautiful and haunted at the same time. Subscribe to keep your clearance to the past. The next city is already waiting. There's one more street I wanted to show you, but the light is fading, and the moss on these oaks looks like ghosts in the dusk. Next time, drop a timestamp in the comments with the city and year you want to see resurrected. Your choice dictates our next excavation. I'm your guide, and the dirt is just starting to tell its secrets. See you soon in the next one.